Once upon a time, in the city of Asaba, Delta State, Nigeria, whispers floated through the air about a woman known as Madam Chialedi. Her real name was Amaka Okoye, a striking beauty in her late 40s with a reputation that sent shivers down the spine of any man who crossed her path. Amaka had risen to power swiftly, becoming the chairwoman of one of Nigeria's largest banks and beverage company. Her success was nothing short of miraculous, as she had transformed her company from a struggling startup to an empire that controlled vast sectors of the economy. She was known for her sharp mind, relentless drive, and the way she could command any room she entered. She was a very beautiful woman. Men of all status, from politicians to business tycoons, fell right under her spell. They were drawn to her like moth to a flame, enticed by her wealth, beauty, and power. But those who succumbed to her allure soon found themselves in serious problems. The first was Chief Babatunde, a prominent senator who, after a secret affair with Amaka, mysteriously drove his car off the Third Mainland Bridge in Lagos. Next was Uche, a young entrepreneur who had just secured a lucrative contract with the government. He was found dead in his bathroom. The pattern was too consistent to be a mere coincidence. And you know that there is no smoke without fire. The rumor spread like wildfire, but nobody could trace any of these to Amaka, the Madam Chialedi, so they remained as rumors. But how did Madam Chialedi come to be? Here is the full story. Amaka's rise to power and wealth was not an ordinary tale of hard work and ambition. No. Behind the opulent lifestyle, the luxurious mansions, and the formidable influence she wielded, there was a dark secret, a covenant that was kept hidden. Years before she became the infamous Madam Chialedi, Amaka Okoye was born in a modest neighborhood in Enugu, Nigeria. The youngest of 4 children, she grew up in a small crowded household where her parents struggled to make ends meet. Her father was a retired civil servant who earned a meager pension, while her mother ran a small shop selling provisions in the local market. Life was tough, and Amaka quickly learned that nothing came easily. From an early age, Amaka was acutely aware of the disparity between her family and the wealthier families in her community. She watched as the children of affluent families attended prestigious schools, wore the finest clothes, and lived in spacious homes, while she had to make do with hand-me-downs and shared textbooks. This stark contrast fueled a deep desire within her to escape the circle of poverty and achieve the kind of success she saw in others. Amaka became determined to break free from the limitations of her upbringing and carve out a better life for herself. Academically, Amaka was a bright and ambitious student. She knew that education was her ticket out of poverty, so she threw herself into her studies, often staying up late into the night to read by the dim light of a kerosene lamp. Despite the financial difficulties, her parents encouraged her to pursue her dreams, saving every penny to ensure she could complete her education. Amaka's hard work paid off when she graduated at the top of the class and earned a scholarship to study business administration at the University of Lagos. What a lucky child. University life was a revelation for Amaka. For the first time, She was surrounded by people from diverse backgrounds, including those who had grown up with wealth and privilege. The contrast between her own experience and those of her wealthier classmates only intensified her resolve to succeed. Amaka became increasingly focused on achieving financial security and climbing the social ladder. She was determined to not only escape poverty, but to rise above it and attain the power and influence she had always envied. After graduating with honors, Amaka entered the workforce with a single-minded focus on building her career. She secured a position as a bank marketer at a small, struggling bank. The job was far from glamorous. It involved long hours, relentless targets, and constant pressure to bring in new clients. Amaka quickly realized that the banking sector was cutthroat, with fierce competition for promotions and opportunities. However, she also saw the potential it offered for those who could navigate its challenges and build strong connections. Amaka's early experience in the banking sector were shaped by the same drive that had propelled her through school. She was relentless in the pursuit of success, using her charm, intelligence, and resourcefulness to attract high net worth clients. However, despite her best effort, she struggled to close big deals, often losing out to more experienced colleagues. The frustrations of watching others succeed where she failed began to take a toll on her. It was during this difficult period that Amaka began to seek alternative means to achieve her goals. The desire to secure her financial future and rise above her humble beginnings grew stronger with each passing day. She started to explore the idea of taking shortcuts to success, driven by the belief that the conventional path would never be enough to get her where she wanted to be. Her desperation and ambition ultimately led her to that fateful encounter with Oba. One night, as she wandered the shores of Bar Beach in Lagos, contemplating her future, she was approached by a mysterious woman. The woman was stunningly beautiful, with a presence that seemed to make the very air around her shimmer. She introduced herself as Oba. Amaka was surprised by the name because it belongs to kings and not ordinary women. But no, she was no ordinary woman. She was the queen of the coast, a powerful marine spirit who ruled over the depths of the ocean and the dark forces that dwelled within. Oba offered Amaka a deal: unimaginable wealth, influence and power in exchange for her loyalty. But the price was deep. Amaka would have to serve as Oba's agent on earth, drawing the souls of men into the underworld through sexual intercourse. She explained that by engaging in intimate relations with men, Amaka would collect their sperm, which will serve as a channel to trap their souls. Once the act was complete, these men will be marked for destruction, and their souls will be claimed by the Queen of the Coast. In her desperation, Amaka agreed to the covenant. She was tired of constant disappointment and the torture of Lagos sun. The queen led her into the water, and all of a sudden she could breathe underwater. Rituals were performed under the light of a full moon, casting on the ocean. Amaka was stripped of her former identity and reborn as the queen's chosen vessel. As part of the ritual, she was given a mystical bracelet fashioned from the scales of a sea serpent, which she was to wear all the time. This bracelet bound her to the queen and ensured that no man who slept with her would escape his fate. From that night onward, Amaka's fortune changed drastically. Doors that were once closed to her now swung open effortlessly. She ascended to the top of the corporate world, amassing wealth beyond her wildest dreams. But her success came at a terrible cost. Every man who fell for Amaka's beauty, who lay with her, soon found himself ensnared by the curse. Their lives took a drastic turn for the worst, from car crashing to plane accidents, mysterious illnesses, business crashing, and all sorts. The final blow always came swiftly, leaving their bodies lifeless and their souls trapped in the underworld, enslaved to the queen of the coast. One of the unfortunate victims with remarkable story was Olakunle. Olakunle was a man of dreams and ambition, born and raised in Ibadan. He had carved a name for himself as a successful businessman with ventures spread across various industries. He was known as a man of vision, someone who turned every venture he touched into gold. His 12,000 capacity fish pond was the largest in Oyo State. His secondary school was thriving with hundreds of students, and his spare part business in the bustling Ladipo market was a hub of activity. Life was good, and Olakunle seemed unstoppable. But success, they say, breeds desire for more, and Olakunle was no exception. When the opportunity to secure a lucrative government contract presented itself, he saw it as a golden ticket to expand his empire. The contract would allow him to supply agricultural products to the government, a deal that promised to multiply his wealth exponentially. However, there was a catch. He needed the favor of the famous Madam Chairlady, Amaka Okoye, who held the keys to unlocking this opportunity. Olakunle was no fool. He had heard the rumors about Amaka, but he dismissed them as the jealous whispers of those who had failed in their own ventures. To him, Amaka was a woman of power, someone who could open doors that were otherwise sealed shut. So, when she invited him to dinner at her lavish mansion in Victoria Island, he didn't hesitate. He went prepared to charm her, to do whatever it took to secure the contract that would cement his status as a mogul. That evening was a blur of luxury, fine wine, exquisite food, and the intoxicating allure of Amaka's presence. She was every bit as mesmerizing as the story said, and Olakunle found himself drawn to her like a moth to a flame. As the night wore on, Amaka made her intentions clear. You will sleep with me for 3 nights. After that, the contract will be yours. In the heat of the moment, Olakunle gave in, dismissing the unease that troubled his conscience. After 3 nights, the contract was his the next morning, signed and sealed with a promise of untold riches. Olakunle celebrated his victory, believing he had made the smartest move of his life. He was all smiles and pride, talking down on other businessmen for not being as smart as he was. Within 1 month, things began to fall apart. It was just like the story of Job, from one issue to the other. It started with his fish pond. What had been a thriving business suddenly turned into a nightmare. A mysterious disease swept through the pond, killing off his entire stock of fish within a day. Despite spending millions on expert consultations and treatment, nothing could save the business. The once bustling fish pond now lay barren, a desolate pit of rotten fish carcasses. Next was his secondary school. A scandal erupted when several teachers were accused of sexual misconduct, leading to a mass withdrawal of students. His school's reputation swimming in the mud. Parents withdrew their children in droves, and the classrooms that were once filled with eager young minds became empty shells. The school was forced to close its doors indefinitely. As if that wasn't enough, his spare parts business also crumbled. How did that happen to? A shipment of high-value goods meant for his store was hijacked on its way from the port, leading to huge losses. The suppliers demanded payment, but with his cash flow already strained from the collapse of other businesses, Olakunle was unable to meet their demands. His credit dried up, and soon debt collectors were knocking on his door. Desperation set in as the walls closed around him. The government contract that had once seemed like a blessing turned into a curse, with delays and bureaucratic red tape preventing him from seeing any returns. His debt piled up, his assets were seized, and his life became a downward spiral of ruin. The man who had once been a king in the business world was now reduced to nothing. Unable to face the shame, Olakunle fled. In the dead of the night, he packed a small bag and left Lagos, abandoning both his family and the city that had once been the source of his pride. He returned to the village in Iseyin, a broken man, hiding from the creditors and the ghost of his past. The once great Olakunle Adebite, who had touched the height of success, now lived in obscurity, a shadow of the man he once was. In his quiet moments, sitting alone in his father's dilapidated house, Olakunle would think back to the fateful night with Amaka, the taste of victory that had turned to ashes in his mouth. The contract that had been the key to his downfall. He had been warned, but he didn't listen. Now, all he had left were memories of a life destroyed by greed and insidious curse of Madam Chialedi. One morning, a palm wine tapper screamed as he saw a man hanging on a tree. It was Olakunle. He had committed suicide the night before. The news spread wide and near, leaving people in shock because not so many people knew that he was back to the village. As Amaka grew more powerful, the darkness within her also grew. The more men she seduced, the more she felt the weight of the souls she had condemned. The wealth and the power that once thrilled her now felt hollow, and she could sense the queen's grip tightening around her own soul. The covenant that had once seemed like a blessing was now a curse, slowly consuming her from within. Despite the whispers and the rumors that followed her, Amaka could not break free. The queen of the coast was always watching, always ready to remind her of the price she had to pay for her success. The bracelet on her wrist, once a symbol of her new life, had become a shackle she could never remove. But everything changed the day she met Chinedu, the simple school teacher. Amaka was seated in her lavish office, gazing out at the Lagos skyline. The power she had was undeniable, but lately it had felt hollow. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Come in," she called, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within her. Chinedu stepped in, carrying a stack of educational proposals. He was there to discuss a partnership with the bank to fund school projects. As he spoke passionately about his ideas, Amaka found herself drawn to something she hadn't seen in a long time, a genuine concern for the well-being of others. "Why are you doing this?" Amaka asked, her voice softer than usual. "Why do you care so much about these children?" she asked again. Chinedu looked at her, his eyes full of sincerity. "Because they are our future. If we don't invest in them, what kind of world are we leaving behind?" His words struck a chord in her. For the first time in years, she felt something other than the cold satisfaction of power. She saw in Chinedu a man who cared not for wealth or influence, but for something far greater. His purity unsettled her, but it also awakened a yearning she had long buried, a yearning for redemption. As their meetings became more frequent, Amaka found herself looking forward to their conversations. Chinedu treated her like an ordinary person, not the powerful chairwoman she was known to be. His refusal to succumb to her charms was both frustrating and refreshing. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, Amaka decided to open up to him. "Chinedu," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something you need to know about me. I am not who you think I am." Chinedu looked at her curiously. "What do you mean, Madam Chairlady?" She hesitated, but the weight of her secret had become too much to bear. "I have done terrible things, things I cannot undo. My success, my wealth, it all came at a price, a dark and terrible price," she said. Chinedu remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I made a covenant with a spirit, the Queen of the Coast. In exchange for power and wealth, I became her agent, drawing men into the underworld. Their lives were destroyed because of me." Chinedu's expression remained calm, but his eyes were filled with compassion. "Amaka, I've had visions about you. I've seen the darkness that surrounds you, but I've also seen the light within you. You are not beyond redemption." Tears welled up in Amaka's eyes. "I want to change, Chinedu, but I don't know how. The Queen, she won't let me go." Chinedu reached across the table and took her hand. "We can pray together, Amaka. We can ask God Almighty to break the chains that bind you. But you must be willing to fight for your freedom." Amaka nodded, desperate for a way out. "Please help me," she said. As Chinedu prayed for her that night, Amaka felt something shift within her. The spiritual bond she had with the Queen of the Coast began to weaken. The bracelet, which had once glowed with an airy light, now dimmed. She could feel the Queen's hold over her breaking, though not without a fight. Night after night, Chinedu continued to pray with her, each prayer a shield of light protecting her from the Queen's wrath. The Queen of the Coast, enraged by Amaka's rebellion, sent nightmares to plague her. Visions of the ocean deep calling her back, threatening to drag her under. But Chinedu's prayers were powerful, a barrier that kept the darkness at bay. One night, as they prayed together, Amaka felt a surge of power within her, a strength she had forgotten she possessed. The Queen appeared in her dreams, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you can escape me? Amaka, you are mine." Amaka stood her ground, her voice steady. "I am no longer your slave. I belong to God Almighty now." The Queen's form began to dissolve, her power waning as Amaka's faith grew stronger. With a final ear-piercing scream, the Queen vanished, leaving Amaka trembling but free. The following morning, Amaka woke up with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The bracelet on her wrist had turned to dust, and the oppressive weight that had once suffocated her was gone. But she knew her journey wasn't over. "Chinedu," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "The covenant is broken, but I need to atone for what I've done. I have to make things right." Chinedu nodded. "It won't be easy, Amaka, but with God's help, you can find redemption. You can heal the wounds you've caused." Amaka's road to recovery was long and arduous. She reached out to the families of the men whose life had been destroyed, seeking forgiveness and offering restitution. It was a painful process, but with each step, she felt a part of her soul being restored. One evening, as she and Chinedu sat on a bench overlooking the city, Amaka finally felt a sense of closure. "Thank you for everything, Chinedu. I couldn't have done this without you." Chinedu smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Amaka, there's something I need to tell you." I can't be in a relationship with you because I'm already with someone else. Amaka's heart sank, but she managed a smile. I understand, Nedu. I'm just grateful for your friendship and guidance. You've given me a second chance at life, and that's more than I could ever ask for. As they parted ways, Amaka knew that her journey was far from over, but she was no longer bound by the darkness that had once consumed her. She was free to seek her salvation, to live a life of integrity and purpose. Amaka's story became a cautionary tale throughout Africa, a reminder of the dangers of pursuing worldly gains at the expense of one's soul. Her life, taking a turn for the best, showed the importance of spiritual integrity, contentment, and the power of prayer. Did you enjoy the story? Kindly subscribe, turn on your post notification bell to be notified when another amazing story is made available. Give us a like, share to your friends, and tell me what you think about Amaka's story in the comment section. Till the next story lovers, enjoy your day. Bye.